Commander Jake Morrison had seen his share of hostile worlds during his 15 years with the Terran Exploration Corps, but Drakmor Prime still managed to surprise him. The planet's crimson sky stretched endlessly above jagged mountain peaks that clawed at the horizon like broken teeth. 2 moons hung in the perpetual twilight, casting an eerie double shadow across the volcanic landscape below. "Atmospheric readings are stable," reported Lieutenant Sarah Chen from the pilot's seat of their survey craft. "Oxygen levels at 21%. Gravity at 0.9 Earth standard. Temperature holding steady at 42 degrees Celsius." Jake wiped sweat from his forehead as he studied the scanner readings on his tablet. "Any signs of the mineral deposits Command mentioned in their briefing?" "Negative on the rare Earth elements, but I'm picking up some unusual energy signatures about 10 kilometers north of our position," Chen replied, her fingers dancing across the control panel. "The readings are unlike anything in our databases." Through the viewport, Jake watched a flock of massive winged creatures soar between the mountain peaks. They moved with an intelligence that suggested they were more than mere animals. Their scales caught the light from Drakmor's twin suns, creating a dazzling display of colors that shifted from deep emerald to brilliant gold. "Those must be the dragons the previous survey team reported," Jake said, unable to hide the wonder in his voice. "Command's Xenobiology department is going to have a field day with the footage we're collecting." Chen nodded, adjusting their course to give the creatures a wide berth. Previous reports suggested they're highly territorial and potentially dangerous. Scans indicate they possess some form of bioelectric discharge capability. The survey mission had started routinely enough. Earth's ever-expanding population needed new sources of rare minerals, and Drakmor Prime's geological surveys suggested vast, untapped deposits. What they hadn't expected was to find the planet inhabited by what appeared to be highly intelligent draconic species. As their craft moved through a narrow canyon, Chen suddenly pulled back hard on the controls. "Jake, look at this." Below them, wedged between 2 massive boulders at the bottom of a steep ravine, lay a much smaller version of the dragons they'd seen earlier. The creature couldn't have been more than a few months old. Its scales a brilliant blue-silver that seemed to pulse with inner light. One wing was clearly damaged, twisted at an unnatural angle. "It's just a baby," Jake whispered, his heart suddenly racing. "Looks like it fell from its nest." "The thermal readings suggest it's been down there for at least 6 hours, Chen reported, her voice tight with concern. "Internal temperature is dropping below normal ranges for its species." Jake was already reaching for his environmental suit. "Set us down on that ledge about 50 meters up from the creature." "I'm going down there." "Jake, are you insane?" Chen spun in her chair to face him. "We don't know anything about their biology, their behavior patterns, or whether the parents are nearby. This could be some kind of trap." "That's a baby down there, Sarah," Jake said firmly, checking the seals on his suit. "Regardless of species, it needs help. Besides, this could be our chance to establish peaceful contact with an obviously intelligent species." Chen shook her head but began the landing sequence anyway. "You know, Command is going to have both our heads if this goes sideways, right? Only if we survive long enough for them to find out," Jake replied with a grim smile. The landing was rough due to the unstable rocky terrain, but Chen managed to set them down without damaging the craft. Jake finished suiting up and gathered his emergency medical kit, along with a portable scanner and a translation device that might help if the dragons had any form of verbal communication. The climb down to the trapped hatchling was treacherous. The rocks were sharp and unstable, heated to uncomfortable temperatures by the planet's twin suns. More than once, Jake had to pause to recalculate his route as handholds crumbled away beneath his weight. When he finally reached the young dragon, he could see the full extent of its predicament. The creature had somehow fallen into a narrow crevice between 2 massive boulders. Its damaged wing was pinned beneath a smaller rock, and its efforts to free itself had only wedged it deeper into the trap. The hatchling's eyes opened as Jake approached, and he found himself staring into depths of intelligence that took his breath away. There was fear there, certainly, but also curiosity and a spark of hope that seemed almost human in its intensity. "Easy there, little one," Jake said softly, though he doubted the creature could understand his words. "I'm here to help." The dragon made a soft chirping sound, almost like a bird, but overlaid with harmonics that suggested a more complex communication system. Its head tilted as it studied Jake, and he had the distinct impression that it was evaluating him just as carefully as he was evaluating it. Jake slowly extended his hand, palm up, in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peaceful intent. The hatchling sniffed cautiously, then gently touched its snout to Jake's gloved fingers. The contact sent a strange tingling sensation up his arm, and for a moment he could have sworn he felt an echo of the creature's emotions. Fear, pain, but also gratitude. "Okay, let's see what we can do about getting you out of there," Jake murmured, pulling out his scanner to get a better understanding of the situation. The readings showed that the hatchling's wing wasn't broken, just severely bruised and strained. The rock pinning it wasn't too large, but it was wedged in such a way that the dragon couldn't get the leverage needed to free itself. With careful effort, Jake thought he could move it without causing further injury. He began by clearing away smaller debris, talking constantly in soothing tones. The hatchling seemed to understand that he was trying to help and stop struggling, instead watching his every move with those remarkably intelligent eyes. "Sarah," Jake called into his comm unit, "I'm going to need the portable winch from the supply locker. This rock is heavier than it looks." "Already on my way down," came Chen's voice, slightly out of breath. "I couldn't just sit up there waiting to see if you got yourself eaten by an angry dragon parent." When Chen arrived with the equipment, she stopped short at the sight of Jake gently stroking the hatchling's head while it made soft, musical sounds. "Well, I'll be damned," she said quietly. "I think it understands we're trying to help," Jake replied, accepting the winch from her. "These creatures are definitely sentient, Sarah. Look at the intelligence in its eyes." Together, they carefully positioned the winch and began the delicate process of moving the pinning rock. The hatchling remained perfectly still throughout the operation, as if it understood that any movement might cause further injury. When the rock finally shifted enough to free the trapped wing, the young dragon let out a sound of relief that was almost a purr. It struggled to its feet, wobbling slightly, and immediately nuzzled against Jake's chest in an unmistakable gesture of gratitude. "Well, would you look at that?" Chen said, her voice filled with wonder. "I think you've made a friend." Jake carefully examined the freed wing, noting that while it was bruised and sore, there didn't appear to be any permanent damage. "The wing should heal fine with rest," he told the hatchling, as if it could understand. "But you're going to be grounded for a while." The dragon chirped again and began climbing carefully out of the crevice. Jake and Chen helped support it, amazed by how light the creature was despite its size. Once free, the hatchling spread both wings experimentally, wincing slightly when it moved the injured one. "We should head back to the ship," Chen said, glancing nervously at the sky. "If the parents are looking for their baby, this is probably where they'll come." But before they could move, the sound of massive wings filled the canyon. Jake looked up to see shapes blotting out the twin suns. Dozens of adult dragons descending rapidly toward their position. "Run!" Chen shouted, but Jake found himself frozen in place as the hatchling pressed against his legs, making urgent chirping sounds. The first adult dragon landed with earth-shaking force just 20 meters away. It was enormous, easily 3 times the size of the hatchling. With scales that shifted from deep red to molten gold, its eyes blazed with intelligence, and something that might have been fury as it assessed the scene. More dragons landed around them until Jake and Chen were completely surrounded. The creatures formed a perfect circle, their massive forms blocking any possible escape route. Jake could feel the heat radiating from their bodies and see the faint electrical discharge crackling between their scales. "Jake," Chen whispered, her hand moving slowly toward her sidearm. "Whatever you're thinking of doing, do it fast." The lead dragon, clearly the largest and most dominant of the group, stepped forward with deliberate slowness. Its head lowered until it was eye level with Jake, and he found himself staring into depths of intelligence that dwarfed even what he'd seen in the hatchling. The creature's massive head turned slightly, examining the freed hatchling, then returned its attention to Jake. The silence stretched endlessly, broken only by the soft chirping of the young dragon and the distant whisper of wind through the canyon. Jake slowly raised his hands, palms out, in the same gesture of peace he'd used with the hatchling. "We helped," he said quietly, knowing the words were meaningless but hoping his tone would convey his intent. "We helped your child." The lead dragon made a sound unlike anything Jake had ever heard. A deep, resonant note that seemed to come from the very depths of the creature's massive chest. The other dragons responded with similar vocalizations, creating a harmony that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Then something extraordinary happened. The hatchling broke away from Jake's side and approached the lead adult, chirping rapidly in what was clearly an excited attempt at communication. The big dragon lowered its head to listen, and Jake could have sworn he saw understanding dawn in its ancient eyes. When the young dragon finished its account, the adult slowly turned back to face Jake. But this time, there was no hostility in its gaze. Only a profound depth of emotion that Jake couldn't quite identify. The dragon took a step back, and then, incredibly, lowered its massive head in what could only be described as a bow of respect. One by one, the other dragons followed suit, until Jake found himself surrounded by an entire flock of the magnificent creatures, all offering him the same gesture of acknowledgement. "Sarah," Jake whispered, barely able to believe what he was seeing. "Are you recording this?" "Every second," Chen replied, her voice filled with awe. "Jake, I think they're thanking you." "Every second." "Jake, I think they're thanking you." The lead dragon raised its head and approached Jake again. But this time its movements were gentle, almost reverent. It extended one massive claw and carefully, incredibly gently, touched Jake's shoulder in what could only be described as a gesture of greeting between equals. The electrical sensation that passed between them was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. For just a moment, he felt something that might have been the dragon's emotions. Gratitude so profound it brought tears to his eyes. Respect deeper than anything he'd ever received from his own kind. And something else, something that felt like recognition. As the sensation faded, Jake realized that something fundamental had just changed. This wasn't just first contact with an alien species. This was the beginning of something entirely new. The hatchling chirped happily and settled down between Jake and the lead adult, apparently content to serve as a bridge between the two species. The other dragons began to settle as well, arranging themselves in a great circle around the three figures. "I think," Jake said quietly, his voice filled with wonder, "we're going to need to call command and tell them to send a diplomatic team instead of a mining operation." Chen nodded, still staring at the incredible scene surrounding them. "Something tells me Drakmor Prime just became a lot more valuable than we ever imagined." Above them, the twin suns of Drakmor began to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. And in a canyon that had witnessed violence and hardship for countless ages, two species met in peace for the very first time, brought together by one human's simple act of compassion and a young dragon's trust. The morning after their extraordinary encounter, Jake woke to find the hatchling curled up against the side of their survey craft like a faithful guard dog. The young dragon's scales caught the early light of Drakmor's twin suns, creating patterns of blue and silver that seemed to shift and dance with each breath. "It's been there all night," Chen reported from inside the ship, where she'd been monitoring communications and environmental readings. The adults dispersed around midnight, but they left sentries posted on the surrounding peaks. "I count at least 12 different individuals maintaining a perimeter around our position." Jake emerged from the craft and was immediately greeted by an enthusiastic chirping from the hatchling. The young dragon had clearly healed significantly overnight, though it still favored its injured wing. More importantly, it seemed to have decided that Jake was now part of its family unit. "Any word from command?" Jake asked, gently scratching behind the hatchling's crest in a spot that made it purr like a massive cat. "That's where things get interesting," Chen replied, her expression troubled. "I sent our initial report last night, including all the visual recordings." Command's response was unexpected. She handed Jake a datapad containing the official communication. As he read, his expression grew increasingly grim. "They want us to maintain distance and gather intelligence on the dragon's military capabilities." Jake's voice rose with disbelief. "Sarah, these are clearly peaceful, intelligent beings. The first thing Command thinks about is whether they pose a threat." It gets worse, Chen said, pulling up another message. Admiral Fletcher is dispatching the heavy cruiser Prometheus with a full marine complement. They'll be here in 6 days. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. The Prometheus was a warship, designed for hostile first contact scenarios. If Command was sending military assets, they clearly viewed the Dragons as a potential threat, rather than an opportunity for peaceful cooperation. The hatchling seemed to sense his distress, nuzzling closer and making soft, questioning sounds. Jake absently stroked its scales while his mind raced through the implications. We need to establish better communication with the adults before the Prometheus arrives, he decided. If they understand what's coming, maybe we can prevent a disaster. Jake, look at this, Chen called, pointing at her scanner readings. I'm detecting some kind of organized movement in the dragon population. Large groups are converging on locations all across the continent. Through their ship's enhanced optical sensors, they could see streams of dragons moving across the sky like rivers of living color. The creatures flew in perfect formations, their movements clearly coordinated and purposeful. It's like they're mobilizing, Chen observed. The question is whether it's in response to our presence or something else entirely. Their speculation was interrupted by the arrival of 3 adult dragons, including the massive leader they'd encountered the previous day. The great creature landed with its characteristic earth-shaking impact and approached their ship with deliberate, careful movements. The hatchling immediately perked up and raced over to the adult, chattering excitedly in their musical language. The conversation between them went on for several minutes, with the adult occasionally glancing toward Jake and Chen with those unsettlingly intelligent eyes. When the exchange concluded, the adult dragon approached Jake directly and did something that nearly made him fall over in shock. It began to speak. The words came haltingly, in accented but unmistakable English. Human Jake. We speak your words now. Jake's mouth fell open. How? How is that possible? The dragon's head tilted in what might have been amusement. Little one shares memory touch with us. We learn from yesterday. Chen grabbed Jake's arm, her eyes wide with excitement. Jake, do you understand what this means? They're not just intelligent. They're telepathic. The hatchling shared your language through that electrical contact. More than language, the dragon continued, its speech becoming more fluid with each word. We know your thoughts from moment of touch, your kindness to little one, your fear for our safety. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. If the dragon had access to his memories from their contact, it might know about the approaching military vessel. You know about the ship, he said quietly. The one that's coming. The dragon nodded slowly. Warship. Many weapons. Your people fear us. Not all of us, Jake said urgently. Some humans, yes, they're afraid of what they don't understand, but others, like me and Sarah, we want to learn, to be friends. The dragon's expression, as much as Jake could read on its reptilian features, seemed to soften. We understand. Dragon people also have those who fear difference. Over the next several hours, Jake found himself engaged in the most extraordinary conversation of his life. The dragon, who gave his name as something that translated roughly to Skyfire, explained that his people had been watching humanity's expansion into space for several decades. We see your ships pass through Sky Road, Skyfire explained, using what Jake realized was their term for space lanes. Some watch with curiosity, others with fear. Why didn't you make contact before now? Jake asked. Skyfire's response was sobering. We remember other Skywalkers who came to worlds with thinking people, sometimes peace, often war. We choose to hide. Jake thought about humanity's history of first contact scenarios, and he couldn't entirely blame them for their caution. Too many encounters had ended in tragedy for one side or the other. The ship that's coming, Jake said carefully. It carries soldiers, because my people are afraid. They don't understand that you're peaceful. But if we could show them, What? Skyfire asked. That you're not a threat, that we can work together, be allies instead of enemies. Skyfire was quiet for a long moment, his massive head turning to gaze at the streams of dragons still flowing across the sky. Your soldiers will see all dragon people gathering, will think we prepare for war. Are you? Jake had to ask. No, Skyfire replied, and his voice carried a weight of sadness. We gather to leave. If warship comes, we will go to deep places, under, mountain, hide, again. Jake felt his heart sink. The opportunity for peaceful contact, possibly the greatest moment in human history, was about to slip away because of fear and misunderstanding on both sides. There has to be another way, he said desperately. What if I could talk to the ship's commander? Explain the situation? Human Jake, Skyfire said gently. You are good heart, but your people send warship after seeing recordings of peaceful meeting. They choose fear over hope. The hatchling, who had been listening intently to the entire conversation, suddenly perked up and began chattering excitedly to Skyfire. The adult dragon listened carefully, then turned back to Jake with what might have been surprise. Little one says, you risked life for unknown child. This is not fear. This is courage. Any decent person would have done the same, Jake protested, but Skyfire shook his massive head. No. We know you're human, Jake. You knew danger. Knew we might be hostile. Still chose compassion. This is rare thing. The dragon was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider something. When he spoke again, his words carried a note of decision. Perhaps there is way, but requires great trust from both sides. What do you mean? Jake asked. Dragon people have gift, can share deep memory with chosen individuals. True understanding beyond words. If your ship leader could experience our thoughts directly, Chen, who had been recording everything, stepped forward. You're talking about some kind of telepathic link? Like what happened when Jake first touched the hatchling? Deeper, Skyfire confirmed. Full memory. Share. Your admiral would see through dragon eyes. Understand. We mean no harm, but also dangerous. Human mind not made for dragon thoughts could cause damage. Jake felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. You're asking me to convince Admiral Fletcher to undergo an alien mind meld that could potentially harm him in order to prevent a conflict that might not even happen. You understand correctly, Skyfire said solemnly. Admiral Fletcher isn't exactly known for his open-mindedness, Chen observed quietly. He's old-school military. Shoot first, ask questions later. Jake looked at the hatchling, who gazed back at him with those impossibly intelligent eyes. In them, he saw not just trust, but hope. This young creature believed that somehow, the human who had saved its life could save both their species from a tragic misunderstanding. There might be a way, Jake said slowly. An idea beginning to form. What if we don't wait for the Prometheus to arrive? What if we go to them? Skyfire tilted his head in confusion. Go to warship? Dragons can fly through space, right? I've seen the long-range scans showing dragon-like creatures in the asteroid belts around other systems. Yes, Skyfire confirmed. But spaceflight is dangerous for young ones and egg layers. Only strongest warriors make journey. Jake's mind was racing now. What if a small group of your people accompanied me and Chen to intercept the Prometheus before it reaches Drakmor? We meet them in neutral space. No weapons, no threats, just talking. Your Admiral would see this as attack, Skyfire pointed out. Not if I'm there vouching for you, Jake argued. Fletcher knows me. We served together 15 years ago. He trusts my judgment, even if he doesn't always agree with my methods. Chen looked skeptical. Jake, you're talking about asking dragons to voluntarily put themselves within range of a heavily armed military vessel. That's asking a lot. The Rever 7Ds, quote, and I'm asking Admiral Fletcher to hold his fire when alien vessels approach his ship, Jake countered. It's asking a lot from everyone involved. Skyfire stood quietly for several minutes, his massive form perfectly still except for the occasional flicker of bioelectrical discharge across his scales. Finally, he spoke. Little one, says, you saved life without thought for reward or recognition. Such courage deserves answer in kind. The dragon turned toward the peaks where his sentries waited and released a sound that was part roar, part song. The call was answered from a dozen different points around the canyon, creating a harmony that made the air itself seem to vibrate with power. We will fly with you to meet, Skyfire announced. But if your people choose violence, then you'll defend yourselves, Jake finished. I understand, and I'll do everything in my power to make sure it doesn't come to that. As the sun reached its zenith, Jake found himself preparing for the most dangerous diplomatic mission in human history. The success or failure of their hastily planned interception could determine whether humanity's expansion into the galaxy would be marked by cooperation or conflict. The hatchling pressed close to Jake's side as he made final preparations, chirping softly in what sounded remarkably like encouragement. Looking down at the young dragon, Jake was reminded that sometimes the most important choices came from the simplest motivations. He had saved a child in need, regardless of species. Now, that same child's family was willing to risk everything to prevent a war that neither side truly wanted. Sarah, he called to Chen, who was running final systems checks on their survey craft. Set course for the edge of the system, and send a message to Admiral Fletcher. Tell him we're coming, and we're bringing friends. The deep space between Drakmor's star system and the approaching Terran fleet was darker than anything Jake had ever experienced. Their small survey craft seemed impossibly fragile as it drifted among the stars, waiting for both the dragons and Admiral Fletcher's forces to arrive at the predetermined coordinates. Still can't believe we're actually doing this, Chen muttered, running her hands through her hair for the dozenth time that hour. When I signed up for the Exploration Corps, Intergalactic Peace Summit in empty space wasn't exactly on the job description. Jake checked their position again, though he'd done so every few minutes for the past 3 hours. Sometimes the most important moments in history happen in the most unlikely places. A soft chime from their communications array indicated an incoming transmission. Jake's stomach tightened as he recognized Admiral Fletcher's voice, crackling through the vast distance. "Commander Morrison, this is Admiral Fletcher aboard the Prometheus. I've received your rather extraordinary message about peaceful contact with indigenous life forms. I have to say, Jake, in 30 years of service, I've never had a subordinate request that I hold fire on approaching alien vessels." Jake activated the reply channel. "Admiral, I know how this sounds, but what we've discovered here could change everything. These beings are not hostile. They're intelligent, peaceful, and willing to communicate." There was a long pause before Fletcher responded. "Jake, I've reviewed the footage you transmitted. Those creatures are clearly powerful, potentially dangerous. My responsibility is to protect human interests and human lives." "Sir, with respect, that's exactly what I'm trying to do," Jake replied. "But I'm thinking long-term. These dragons could be humanity's greatest allies, not our enemies." "Dragons?" Fletcher's voice carried a note of disbelief. "Commander, are you feeling all right? You're talking about fairy tale creatures." Chen leaned over to the communications panel. "Admiral, this is Lieutenant Chen. The creatures we encountered display technology and intelligence that could advance human knowledge by centuries. We're not talking about myths here, sir. We're talking about a first contact scenario with massive implications." Before Fletcher could respond, their proximity alarms began chiming. Jake looked up through the viewport and felt his breath catch in his throat. Against the star field, a formation of dragons was approaching, their scales catching and reflecting distant starlight in patterns that seemed almost like navigation lights. "Jake," Chen whispered. "They're beautiful." Skyfire led the formation, his massive form moving through space with a grace that defied physics. Behind him flew 12 other adults, their bioluminescent patterns creating a light show that painted the inside of the survey craft in shifting colors. Most remarkably, the hatchling flew between 2 of the adults, its small form protected within the formation, but clearly keeping pace despite its recent injury. "Admiral," Jake called urgently into the comm. "They're here. 13 dragon vessels approaching our position. Please confirm that your weapons are powered down." "Vessels?" Fletcher's voice was sharp. "Commander, my sensors are reading organic life forms, not spacecraft. Sir, they fly through space naturally. It's part of their biology. They're no more vessels than a bird is an aircraft." The lead dragon approached their ship, and Jake could see Skyfire's great head turning to examine their craft. The creature's eyes seemed to glow with their own light in the darkness of space. "Human Jake," came Skyfire's voice through their communication system. Though Jake wasn't entirely sure how the dragon was managing to transmit on their frequencies. "Your warship approaches. We sense much fear and anger." "Admiral Fletcher is a good man," Jake said, both into his comm and to Skyfire. "He's just cautious. He's responsible for the lives of his crew. We understand. Such burden," Skyfire replied. "Dragon leaders also carry weight of their people's safety." The proximity alarms chimed again, this time indicating the approach of human vessels. The Prometheus emerged from faster-than-light travel with the characteristic flash of displaced energy, followed by 2 escort frigates. The massive cruiser's hull gleamed with the harsh light of its running lights, and Jake could see weapon systems powering up across its surface. "All vessels. This is Admiral Fletcher aboard the UES Prometheus. Unknown contacts. Identify yourselves and state your intentions." Jake opened a 3-way communication channel. "Admiral, this is Commander Morrison. I'm in communication with the Dragon Leader, who calls himself Skyfire. They're here to talk. Nothing more." "Commander, my tactical officer reports that these organic vessels are generating energy readings equivalent to capital ship weapon systems," Fletcher replied tersely. I need assurance that they're not hostile. Skyfire's voice joined the channel, his English now remarkably fluent. Admiral Fletcher. I am Skyfire, speaker for the mountain clans of Drakmor. We come seeking understanding, not conflict. The energy you detect is our life force, not weapons. There was a long silence on the channel. Finally, Fletcher spoke again, his voice carefully controlled. This is unprecedented, Skyfire. Can you provide assurance that your people mean no harm to human vessels or personnel? We swear by the light of the first nest, Skyfire replied, his voice carrying formal weight. No dragon person will raise claw or flame against human people unless first attacked. We offer this pledge as bond between our kinds. Jake watched through the viewport as the two fleets faced each other across the void. The dragons had arranged themselves in a non-threatening formation, while the human ships maintained combat readiness, but with weapons trained away from the alien vessels. Admiral, Jake said carefully, Skyfire has offered to share memories directly with you, to prove their peaceful intentions. It would involve brief telepathic contact. Absolutely not, Fletcher snapped. I'm not allowing alien influences into my mind. Sir, I experienced the same contact when I first rescued their young. It's how I know they can be trusted. You rescued one of their children? Fletcher's voice carried surprise. Yes, sir. A hatchling that had fallen and become trapped. The entire flock could have killed me and Lieutenant Chen easily. But they chose to honor us instead because we helped their young. Skyfire's voice returned to the channel. Admiral Fletcher. Perhaps different demonstration would ease your concerns? What kind of demonstration? You have weapons that could destroy any one of us. Instantly, yes? Fletcher's reply was cautious. Our weapons are designed for ship-to-ship combat. They would be effective against organic targets. Yes. Then, we will show our trust in human Jake's word about your honor. The scene stage, your honor. To Jake's amazement, Skyfire broke formation and approached the Prometheus directly. The massive dragon's flight path took him within point-blank range of the ship's main batteries. Skyfire, what are you doing? Jake called out, showing, your admiral, that we trust his word as we trust yours. The dragon replied calmly. Fletcher's voice was tense on the comm. All weapons. Hold fire. I repeat, hold fire. Skyfire continued his approach until he was close enough to the Prometheus that his massive form filled the bridge's main view screen. Jake could imagine the effect on the human crew as the ancient, intelligent eyes of the dragon studied their ship. Admiral Fletcher, Skyfire said, his voice now coming from very close to the human vessel. We place our lives in your hands, as human Jake placed his life in ours when he saved our child. Jake held his breath as the moment stretched. This was it, the fulcrum on which the future relationship between two species would balance. Finally, Fletcher's voice came across the channel, and Jake could hear something in it that he'd never heard from the Admiral before. Wonder. Skyfire, I've been a soldier for 30 years. I've seen a lot of things in that time, but I've never seen anything like the trust you're showing right now. Trust must be given to be received, Skyfire replied. Stand down all weapons, Fletcher ordered his crew. Power down all defensive systems. If our guests are willing to be vulnerable, then so are we. Jake watched in amazement as the Prometheus's weapon systems went dark. The escorts followed suit, leaving both fleets hanging in space. Defenseless, but no longer threatening. Now, Fletcher continued, Skyfire, about this memory sharing you mentioned, how exactly does it work? What followed was the most extraordinary diplomatic exchange in human history. Skyfire carefully explained the memory touch process. while Admiral Fletcher asked detailed questions about the risks and safeguards. Finally, the Admiral agreed to attempt a limited contact. Jake and Chen transferred to the Prometheus to witness the historic moment. The ship's main hangar bay was pressurized and open to space, allowing Skyfire to enter without leaving the vacuum that dragons seem to prefer for important ceremonies. The great dragon settled onto the hangar deck with surprising gentleness, his massive form nonetheless dwarfing the assembled humans. Admiral Fletcher stepped forward, flanked by his senior officers but clearly nervous about the unprecedented situation. "I've faced enemy fire, boarding actions, and hostile alien encounters," Fletcher said quietly to Jake. "But I've never been this nervous about anything in my life." "All we have Fletcher. He's a good person, Admiral," Jake assured him. "If he were human, he'd be the kind of officer you'd want serving under you." Fletcher approached Skyfire and extended his hand, as Jake had done with the hatchling days before. The dragon lowered his great head and gently touched his snout to the Admiral's palm. The effect was immediate and visible to everyone present. Fletcher's eyes widened, then seemed to unfocus as the memory touch took hold. His expression cycled through surprise, wonder, fear, and finally, profound understanding. When the contact ended after several minutes, Fletcher staggered slightly. Jake steadied him, noting that the Admiral's face was wet with tears. "My God," Fletcher whispered, his voice shaking. "Jake, they're not just intelligent. They're wise. Ancient. They've been watching us for decades, hoping we'd prove worthy of contact." Skyfire's voice was gentle. "We have seen your kind's capacity for both great good and terrible destruction. Human Jake's choice to risk his life for unknown child showed us which aspect of humanity we should hope to work with." Fletcher looked around at his officers, then back to Skyfire. "What you've shown me, the knowledge your people possess, the technologies, the history of other species you've encountered, this changes everything." "Not everything," Skyfire corrected gently. "Human people still must choose their path. We can offer guidance, friendship, but wisdom cannot be given, only earned." Over the next several hours, Jake found himself serving as translator and mediator as two species began the delicate process of establishing formal relations. The dragons shared star charts showing safe passages through previously unknown regions of space. The humans offered medical knowledge and manufacturing techniques that could benefit dragon society. But the most important exchange was simpler and more profound. The hatchling, who had been waiting patiently during the formal proceedings, finally approached Admiral Fletcher with the same trusting curiosity it had shown Jake. Fletcher knelt down and gently stroked the young dragon's crest, just as Jake had done. "You know," he said quietly, "I have grandchildren back on Earth about your age. They're going to be amazed when they hear about you." The hatchling chirped happily and nuzzled against Fletcher's chest, completely comfortable with this new human friend. "Admiral," Jake said, watching the interaction, "I think this is going to be the beginning of something incredible." Fletcher nodded, still amazed by everything he'd experienced. "Jake, what you did, rescuing that young one, it's going to be remembered as the moment everything changed. One act of compassion opened the door to the greatest partnership in human history." Skyfire's rumbling voice carried a note of amusement. "Perhaps it is dragon history as well. We have much to learn from human courage and human heart." As the two fleets began their journey back to Drakmor Prime together, Jake stood at an observation port watching the dragons fly alongside human vessels. Their bioluminescent patterns seemed to be synchronized with the ship's running lights, creating a display of interspecies cooperation that took his breath away. Chen joined him at the viewport. "You know they're going to want to put you up for every medal in the book, right? First successful peaceful contact with an alien species, prevention of an interstellar war, opening of relations with an advanced civilization." Jake shook his head, still watching the dragons. I just helped a kid who was hurt. Everything else came from that choice. That's what makes it so remarkable, Chen replied. You didn't calculate the political ramifications or consider the strategic implications. You just saw someone who needed help and acted. Skyfire's voice came over the ship's communication system, addressing the entire crew. Human friends. We have shared much. This day. Knowledge, trust, hope for, future. But greatest gift was simple one, shown by human, Jake, compassion for child in need. This is true treasure. Two that makes all other gifts possible. As Jake listened to the dragon's words echoing through the ship, he realized that Skyfire was right. Technology could be shared, territories could be negotiated, and treaties could be signed. But trust, real, lasting trust between species, could only be built one act of kindness at a time. The hatchling had found Jake in the ship's corridors and was now perched on his shoulder like an oversized, scales parrot. It chirped softly and nuzzled his ear, apparently as content with its new extended family as Jake was with his. Looking out at the stars ahead, Jake smiled. Humanity was about to enter a larger universe, guided by allies who valued the same simple virtues that had driven him to help a child in need. The future had never looked brighter. Behind them, Drakmor Prime grew larger in the viewport, no longer just a planet to be surveyed and exploited, but a new home where two species would learn to live and grow together. And at the heart of that future was a lesson as old as civilization itself. That sometimes, the smallest acts of compassion can have the greatest consequences.